Kickstarter has rapidly become an amazing publishing platform for authors. It's a fantastic space to find new readers, to get more discoverability, to offer a really cool, exciting project to your existing fans, and it's especially a great home for non-traditional or less common types of books or projects than to do well on retailers like Amazon historically. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through everything that I can think to share with you to equip you to run a very successful campaign for a book on Kickstarter by talking you through the 10 tips that helped me to earn over $10,000 on my first Kickstarter for my Far Shore Chronicles series. Through the process of that campaign, yeah, I learned a lot about Kickstarter and some things that surprised me and some of the ways that it is actually quite different than publishing on traditional retailers like Amazon. So let's get into it. So I would say that these 10 tips are in no particular order except for tip number 1, which is absolutely the most important of all of them that I'm going to share, and that is to understand the Kickstarter ecosystem. By that I mean it's really important that you understand the type of reader and consumer that exists on Kickstarter, why they back projects, what their priorities are, what's important to them, and what isn't important to them. As cool as Kickstarter is, and I've backed a lot of projects, I love finding cool creators and interesting new things on Kickstarter. It is more complicated than buying a product on a traditional retailer, and there are some bumps along the way, and there's always the caveat that you are backing something that is not completely finished yet. Some projects are more done than others, but in all cases, there's always that element that what you're backing isn't completely done yet, so you're not going to get it right away. When you buy a book on Amazon, especially if it's an ebook, it is on your device in seconds and you can start reading it right away. So the reason, in my experience, that people like Kickstarter and that the Kickstarter common backers, super backers, people that like to actually be on that platform and find projects there, it's not so much just about getting the product. It's not transactional to the same extent that buying on a retailer is. It's really more experiential and communal. People like being on Kickstarter and supporting projects on Kickstarter because that means that you're actually a part of something. You're supporting a project that you think is awesome and helping it become real, and you get to connect with the author or creator in a different way. So access and experience and connection matter a lot more on Kickstarter than they do on retailers. Kickstarter is also less about price value than it is about content value. What I mean by that is on a retailer, one of the primary ways that you are competing with all the other stuff, the millions and millions of books on Amazon, for example, is through your price. And you can always find something cheaper, and readers who are buying on those retailers often are very price conscious, and 99 cents difference between one book or the other might be the determining factor in deciding what they buy. Kickstarter is different. The price, you don't buy on Kickstarter or back on Kickstarter necessarily because you're getting a great value, although in a little bit when we talk about tiers, it's really important that you do give a lot of value. But a lot of Kickstarter tiers are in the $30, $40, $50, $100 range. My average backer amount was $60-some, which means that overall, that people were backing at a lot more than what it would cost to buy stuff on retailers. Now, I was running a campaign for print edition books, so if you bought all 6 of my paperbacks on retailers, that's actually not too far off and you're getting good value. But the key thing to understand, again, when it comes to price differentiation is that the way that you stand out on Kickstarter has less to do with just bargain basement pricing and more to do with creating an amazing experience that people get excited about and they don't want to miss out on. Because one thing that Kickstarter does have going for it is exclusivity. Because Kickstarter campaigns are timed, and because typically the stuff you're putting into your rewards and your tiers might be exclusive to your Kickstarter campaign, or the only way to ever get that thing or to get those things in that combination, there's a bit of a FOMO that kicks in, where if you create a great campaign that people get excited about and don't want to miss out on, there's that incentive to back now so that you can be part of something unique, part of something specific. So those are all considerations to keep in mind as you understand the Kickstarter ecosystem. One of the best ways that I cannot recommend strongly enough to start learning what that is to be on Kickstarter as a consumer before you jump to trying to be on Kickstarter as a creator. There's so much cool stuff on this platform. Spend some time, I guarantee you will find some things you're interested in. Back some campaigns. Back some campaigns at different levels. If you can afford it, find a campaign you really believe in and back at not just the cheapest possible level. Then really pay attention to what kinds of updates do those creators send out? What kinds of stretch goals do they use? How do they communicate with you throughout the campaign? What do you get when it comes to you? Like, go through the consumer experience of Kickstarter several times so that you can really get a feel for it, because it's a different kind of space. And like I said, the priorities and the value system of especially frequent Kickstarter backers is a bit different, and it's important to understand what they're looking for from you as a creator and from your campaign. So tip number 2 is visuals matter. Not just your book cover, but all throughout your campaign. In fact, you need more visuals than just your book cover to set up a good campaign on Kickstarter. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You could take your book cover and create a series of 3D mock-ups. Spend some time playing around in Canva with the free version. Make headers for each of your sections that are actually graphic or font headers that look good and are appealing and clean. Create nice, when you're doing bullets, don't just slap a bunch of text on the page, but organize it in a nice way and use visual cues and other good images and graphics to really pop. When people are scrolling through Kickstarter, Kickstarter looks amazing. Again, going back to tip number 1, if you're on there as a reader, you will quickly start to see what are the things that draw your attention, what are the things that catch your eye. Take notes about that and incorporate some of that into your own campaign. But visuals are really, really important. So depending on what kind of assets you already have for your book or your series, think ahead and make sure that you plan some really eye-catching visuals for your page. Tip number 3 is to focus on feeling over features. I think sometimes it's easy, especially if it's your first campaign, to fall into the trap of just listing everything that people get if they back your campaign. Well, if you back at this tier, you get a book, and then at this tier, you get the book and the audiobook, and at this tier, you get the book and the audio. Like, that's important. Be clear about your features, be clear about what people get, but don't just assume that that's enough. It's not enough, because like I said again in tip number 1, which I'm gonna refer to a lot in this video, the Kickstarter space is different. People don't wanna just get a laundry list of the stuff you're putting in the bundle as like, oh yeah, checklist of items. They want to feel something. They want to know how it's going to feel to read your story, so definitely be clear about that. You talk about your tropes, talk about your references. They want to get to know you as the creator. Talk a little bit about your process of writing the story and your journey as an author. Let them get into your headspace and your world. This is something you can really focus on in your video, which you should definitely film, even if you're not super comfortable on camera. There are some good resources available for how to work on that. The videos don't need to be long or super flashy, but you want to give people a feel for who you are. But also, again, focus on creating a feeling of participation, community, and value. People are more likely to back your campaign if backing your campaign means becoming part of something, not just getting something. That segues really nicely into tip number 4, which is to focus on telling a story. And for that, I'm really talking about how you share your campaign. Don't just say, hey, I have a Kickstarter campaign, back my campaign 300 times over the course of your campaign and just constantly bang the drum of, I have a campaign, I have a campaign, I have a Kickstarter, back my Kickstarter. Yes, of course, you need to tell people you have a Kickstarter, and that's probably what a lot of your initial launch content is gonna sound like, your launch announcements and so on. But focus on really sharing in that window what is awesome about your book. What I loved about running my campaign is that it finally gave me time to breathe. When you do a book on Amazon, you get this tight little blurb that has to be like real short to be competitive, and you're putting it up against a bunch of other things and also bots, and your book is a product. But when I did my Kickstarter campaign, I was able to take a step back and talk about who my stories are for. They're for readers who like a certain kind of fantasy, who kind of maybe have a nostalgic fondness for a type of fantasy that doesn't get written as often anymore, or for certain kinds of characters, or for certain kinds of tropes. What do you love most about your story? What do you love most about your characters? What do you love most about the feeling that it leaves you with? And share that, not just on your campaign page, but share that in your emails and share that in your posts. I did a lot of communicating for my campaign. I think over the 18 days that I ran my campaign, I emailed almost every single day, but I didn't really have any complaints because each email or each social media post wasn't just, hey, don't forget I have a campaign. It was character profiles and world building windows, because again, mine is fantasy. So I was talking about I did a feature on, hey, here's how elves in my world are different than elves you might have seen anywhere else and what I think is so cool about them. You know, here's what I love so much about my protagonist. Here's how magic works in my world. And I think that had a lot to do with my campaign's overall success, because it gave people an opportunity to get invested in my story and my world, not just to see it as a product that they might want to buy. So with some of that philosophical framing out of the way, let's move into some tips about how to set up your campaign. And that leads us to tip number 5, which is to make smart tiers. There's a lot of theory that goes into tiers. I don't think there's one right way to do it by any stretch of the imagination, but one thing I would highly recommend as you're thinking about your tiers is think about the sort of psychology of someone who's coming to your campaign for the first time. They see your page, they get excited because you've told them a story, you've given them a chance to start to feel like they get to be part of something cool, they get excited about it, and then they go look at your tiers to see where they might want to back. Your early tiers are your more directly transactional tiers. That's where you want to make sure that the dollar value you set for your tier is pretty appropriate to, roughly speaking, what people would expect to see on retailers. So if you're doing a campaign for a single book or for a book bundle, you can add assets to your tiers to make them more valuable. But those early tiers, you don't want someone to go, oh my gosh, $30 for an ebook. I'm not paying $30 for an ebook, and then they don't look at anything else. So make sure that your introductory tiers are a place where people who just kind of want to get your thing can get it without too much fuss. Your middle tiers, though, are where you can start getting into what I think is really the sweet spot of Kickstarter, which is Product Plus. It's not just the book, it's the book with a lot of other cool stuff that you're not gonna get when you buy the book through Amazon. I'll talk in my next tip about some ideas of how you can break some of that stuff down, but as you're making your smart tiers, what I tried to do is to look at each tier, think about what made that tier special? What made it really, like, give it a theme? Not just it's the $15 tier, but this is the tier for people who really like audiobooks, and so this is where the audiobook comes into the mix, or what have you. Like, make sure it's really clear and themed what each tier is for, and then think about what makes the next tier above it kind of a no-brainer. Be like, well, but hang on a minute. If I was already just about to spend $10 for this, but for $15, I could get that and that added in, okay, I'll probably do that. Oh, wait a minute, but for $25, I could actually get the physical one with these things and then this added to it as well. And then I guess if I was gonna spend $25, and that process can kind of keep going. If you think of your tiers as a sequence where you try to make sure that each tier is valuable on its own, but then the next tier above it is sort of an obvious no-brainer of like, well, but if I was here, why don't I just go to that so I can get that next cool thing? It can be a really effective way to think about what you put in all your tiers, how you structure them, and I do think that was, again, part of the reason why my average pledge was pretty high, because I think a lot of people came into the campaign, got interested in those early tiers, but then it was like, well, I could just kind of keep going and I'll get a lot of extra value by adding only a few extra dollars to get these cool extra neat things. And that's really where I put a lot of the stuff that was very exclusive to Kickstarter, things that no one else is ever gonna get because that campaign is over and it's not gonna run again. So that formatting or those additions or the special covers or different things that you're gonna include that are exclusive to the campaign you're running, I think that middle set of tiers from about $25 to maybe $75 range is really, I think, the sweet spot for Kickstarter. But as you're going through and making your smart tiers, make sure that each tier is valuable on its own and that the next tier above it is sort of a no-brainer from there. But that sort of begs the question, okay, great, Justin, that sounds fine. What do I put in all of those tiers? So that leads me to tip number 6, get creative. Remember that you don't need to only sell the physical content of your story. Get into your headspace of your world and have fun thinking of interesting, creative things that you could spin out from your world that give people who are excited about your story a chance to kind of live in that space a little bit more. Some things that I've seen that I think are really cool ideas, I recorded an author commentary that was a couple hours of me just talking through the process of writing this series over the 2 years that I wrote it and kind of what all went into that. And that was a content piece that went into some of the middle tiers that you didn't get until you got to that point. You can create really cool art stuff. You can make posters. You can get into physical things like buttons or stickers or postcards. I made a set of stickers with a quote from the book that fans of the book would get. It's sort of an inside joke because it's the protagonist's favorite swear phrase in her language, and that was one of those things that got added to certain kinds of tiers. I made character art, or I bought character art from an artist that I really like of the main characters in the story, and then I actually offered these both as a postcard, but I cut them and included bookmarks. And then it was cool because it was a collectible set where at lower tiers you got 1 bookmark, but then at higher tiers you got all 5 bookmarks. I made postcards with cover art. We did maps from the world, and actually hiring someone to create another map was one of the stretch goals, and then once that got funded, we added that into the thing. So you can get creative. I mean, think about recipes, music playlists, any and all ways that you can give your readers a chance to enjoy being in your world and your setting and your story, and you'll be best able to figure out what some of those things are. But it doesn't just have to be the core product of your book to flesh out your tiers and make them feel really awesome and exciting. But that leads us to tip number 7, which is don't overdo it. Specifically, this has to do with physical stuff. Remember that every physical item you create, it might seem like a really cool idea, and maybe it is a really cool idea, but it's something you have to fulfill, which means you have to get it printed, which means it adds costs to your campaign, and it adds time and energy to your campaign, because it's all stuff that is either gonna have to be cut out or folded or put in the envelopes. Not saying that they're not a great idea and worth it. I actually had a lot of fun with those things, but stop and really think about anytime you're adding a physical item to your campaign, and don't create so much extra work for yourself that you either have trouble fulfilling it or you end up going over budget, or, you know, resenting the fact that you added all these things that then later you have to fulfill. So it's a little bit of a balancing act to strike. I was really happy that a lot of the assets that I added were digital assets, like the audiobooks that I had already recorded, the author commentary, and then I wrote some extra things. So I wrote sort of a journal from the point of view of the main character that was exclusive to the campaign. I had some short stories that I had never actually included in the books before from the world, from the setting of the story, so I included those. And all of those digital assets were a great addition because they allowed me to put good content and valuable content into the tiers that didn't create a lot of extra work on my part to fulfill once the campaign was finished. And that does lead us to tip number 8, which is to make sure that you research your costs. So obviously, like I've mentioned, anything you do that's physical has a cost associated with it. You can go to the sources that you're planning to print from, like a lot of these kinds of materials that I made, I got from Staples. So you can go on their print planner and start queuing up a project and get a good estimate of what that will probably cost you to print in volumes. I would highly recommend that you overestimate the number that you think you're gonna need when you're estimating your costs, and make a spreadsheet for yourself, or however you like to break things down, to figure out what your price per unit is, so that you make sure to include those costs in the cost of the tiers you're putting them in. Make sure you account for your time and energy. Time and energy is a cost, and fulfilling a campaign takes a lot of it. I had something like 600 books when I was done that had to be signed. That took several days in batches, and then everything had to be put in different sized boxes with different components in it. Again, all super worth it, and I was so thrilled for the response, but I'm glad that I accounted for the time and energy that was going to be required to fulfill the campaign when I was pricing things out and figuring out how I was going to structure my tiers. Make sure you think about processing fees. Kickstarter takes a processing fee, and there are maybe other points along the process. And of course, think about shipping. If you're doing anything physical, shipping gets more expensive every year. So really think about and research what it's going to cost you to ship your products once they are fulfilled, so that you either incorporate the cost of shipping into your tiers, or you make it very clear that shipping costs will be assigned after the campaign closes and they're not included in the price. But either way, those are all things you need to make sure you really do your homework and think about what everything is going to cost on the back end, so that you don't accidentally, yay, I did a great campaign and we raised all this money, but actually it all got eaten up with costs that I didn't anticipate, because that can definitely happen. Tip number 9 is to think about cross-promoting. What I mean by cross-promoting is, don't think that you're the only one who will be interested in sharing your campaign with people. There are a lot of great Facebook groups and other social media groups of authors. There are two that I highly recommend for Kickstarter authors specifically, and I will put the links to those in the video. They're amazing groups where you can get a ton of feedback and great advice when you're creating your campaign, but also they're wonderful places to ask other authors and creators who are running campaigns of their own to share your campaign with their readers in their backer updates or in their email blasts or on their social media, and then you do the same for them, and it's sort of a rising tide floats all boats type of situation. And especially if you can find other authors or creators who are doing projects that are like yours or in your genre so that their readers are readers who would be excited about your thing, it's a phenomenal way to expand your reach just a little bit. And the more you can do to start bringing any level of exposure and traffic to your campaign, especially early goings, will definitely cue Kickstarter to do that for you as well. And that's a great way to get some internal discoverability going. But that is something, if you're going to go to all the work of running the campaign, yes, of course you want to email to your own list. Yes, of course you want to post on your own social media and tell friends and family and all that other good stuff. But I highly recommend doing a little bit of legwork to try to arrange some cross promotion with other Kickstarter creators and authors. And tip number 10 will probably come as no surprise if this list has started to sound a little bit daunting to you, is to plan ahead. Yes, a Kickstarter campaign is a lot of work, and don't let anyone tell you that it's not, because it is, but it's work that is absolutely worth it. It was a phenomenal experience. It was amazing to raise over $10,000 for my campaign, but the part that I was even most excited about is that I connected with a whole batch of new readers, people who had never experienced my books before, and a lot of them in my survey said they would be happy to be on my mailing list, and now they're kind of part of my audience ecosystem and part of my fan base and community, which is amazing. It was a wonderful way to meet people and connect with other passionate fantasy fans that I never would have found otherwise. So it's absolutely worth it, but it takes some work. The more you can do ahead of time, the easier your campaign will be. Don't wait until your campaign starts to try to figure out what emails you're gonna write or what posts you're gonna put up. Create them all ahead of time. There's no reason not to, or at least most of them. Prep your graphics ahead of time, make your page. Obviously you have to do that before you launch, but the more work you can do, and especially the number one thing that I would do in hindsight is get everything ready to deliver, which means formatting and other components. Because in my head I was running a campaign for a series that had already been out for a while, I didn't think about it as hard as I should have, but I was running a campaign for print editions, which I had never done before, and the formatting process and getting print covers and then getting everything approved through Amazon and through my print fulfillment and all the different things that I had to do, there were more hiccups and hurdles than I anticipated, which means it took me longer to fulfill my campaign, unfortunately, than I would have liked to. I mean, obviously I got it done, but it took me longer than it would have if I had thought ahead and made sure that I had all of my print editions formatted and I had the covers in hand. I mean, I had the covers, but I didn't have print covers. Little things like that. The more you can do to prepare before you launch, the less anxiety you will experience, the smoother your campaign will go, and the more time and energy you can spend on the right things rather than suddenly scrambling to try to come up with, you know, stretch goals or to write some social media posts, but oh, I got sick and then I missed a couple days in my campaign or whatever. Like, try as much as possible to prepare ahead of time, which includes getting your pre-page up as soon as possible, at a minimum, I would say 2 weeks before, and start inviting people to follow your campaign. But there's no reason not to do it maybe even a few months before, and the more followers you get before your campaign starts, the better off you're gonna be on day one. So plan ahead, give yourself lots of lead time, don't cut corners, because it's gonna take you a lot of work one way or the other. So do everything you can to make sure that the work and the energy that you're investing in your campaign pays off for you by preparing ahead of time for it to be a success. So those are 10 tips that helped me to make over $10,000 in my first Kickstarter campaign. I would love to know from you, have you run a Kickstarter campaign before? And if you have, what has worked for you? Share it in the comments and maybe other people can benefit from that as well. If you find this kind of content helpful, if you would like to continue to talk with me and hang out here talking about what makes great stories and great storytelling, publishing, other things like that, or if you're a reader who is more interested in learning some of the inside baseball that goes into writing your favorite stories, then be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications button for more content like this every week.